Hello, this is Brian Mercer for Author Magazine. Today I'm speaking with John Horner Jacobs. Jacobs has worked in advertising for the last 15 years, played in bands and pursued art in various forms. He is also, in his copious spare time, a novelist. His first novel, Southern Gods, was published in August by Nightshade Books. So John, thanks for talking to me today. Your book is Southern Gods. Tell us about it.
Okay, Southern Gods is a mashup of the crime noir genre with a Southern Gothic homecoming story with some Lovecraftian cosmic horror thrown in.
This is your debut novel?
Yes, sir.
But this isn't the first novel you've written.
It was the first novel I wrote at the time.
But certainly written before. I mean, it's a beautifully written book, and I can't imagine this is your first excursion into writing.
When I was in college, I thought I was going to be a writer, and this is back in the early 90s. I was trying to be sort of like, Faulknerian. I was under the shadow of the great Southern writers. I didn't have the discipline to do it. I mean, I was just sort of a punk kid with long hair and drank too much beer. And then, I had to go back to school, get another degree. I got married and had kids and lived my life. And before I knew it, I was 37. And I was like, if I'm not going to write a novel now, when am I going to do it? I mean, I've always been telling me someday I'm going to write that book. If I just realized if I don't do it now, I'm never going to do it. So I started writing. But, in between that time and when I was a kid, I read thousands of books. I mean, I have a degree in English, so I did read all the prerequisite great books. And, I feel like a great book is a book that sort of meshes style and tone and unforgettable characters with a plot that is engaging.
There's a lot of ancient lore in your book, and I was curious how you went about researching that. Was that something that you just knew about, or is it something you went searching for when you decided to write?
I sort of just threw the whole kitchen sink in there. I mean,
right.
I love Roman history. I've read a lot of Roman history, and I've also one of my favorite sort of subgenres of literature is the sort of historical novel set in Rome. And the rest of it I just sort of made up or sort of conjured out of my brain. I don't know. I mean, there's some historical deities and there's some fake deities. And then there's, sort of a hidden history of the Catholic Church, which I semi-made up. I mean, I did a little bit of research, but, I came up with all that. And I sort of blended it with the secret history of Nero Wolfe.
It was very effective because it read to me like you had done research and that it was authentic.
Well, yeah, I mean, some of it, yes, I did do research in the sense that, when I was in my 20s, I studied in Austria. So, I mean, when I was talking about, the character Gregor writing in Austria, I had been to those places. I had to do more research, honestly, on 1951 than I did have to do on, the secret gods and the Latin and all that stuff.
Yeah, the 1951 aspect of it felt really authentic. You wrote an essay about it and talking about how you didn't want to write about the 1950s. That was you saw on TV. That was the Leave It to Beaver model.
Yeah, I mean, I guess one of the problems of writing a historical fiction that's done, and a lot of people who have read the book who were alive and remember 1951, and I was born in 1971. I mean, so I knew I had my job cut out for me by getting the details of 1951 right. That scared me more than writing about the sort of lore and the Catholic Church and everything. Because, if I got one of those little fabric of reality details wrong, it could knock everyone out of the story.
So you're an artist and a musician and a writer, and I'm curious, do you see yourself as a writer, or do you see yourself as an artist or as a musician, or what kind of drove what?
I'm a designer and an art director and, a creative person by profession. I mean, that's what I do to make a living. But the musician stuff that's just a hobby. I mean, it's a fun hobby, and I'm good at it. I've been sort of cursed by being pretty good at quite a few things, but not, great at any one thing. I guess of all of them, I feel like I'm having more success at the writing thing, so I guess I'll stick with it.
So you have two daughters, so I'm curious, when do you find time to write?
During the school year, my kids have to be at school by 7:30. Most of the people at my office do not get to work until about 8:45 or 9. So usually I'll come to work and get at least 30 minutes in. If at lunch if my job allows me, I will go over to the library. I go over there and get one of their study rooms, and I'll write. And then most of it is really at night. I mean, honestly, it's like after the kids go to bed, I write as much as I can. And it's harder now. I wrote 4 novels in 4 years, and 3 of those are contracted to be published. The 4th one looks like it will be, hopefully. But I still have a day job.
So you have a 3-book contract with a YA novel. Now you've got to start pumping them out. You have deadlines now. I'm curious, do you outline? Do you know what you're going to write beforehand?
No, I'm not a plotter. It's the plotter versus pantser is what they call it. I am a modified flying by the seat of my pantser. I always know when I start a book, I always know the characters and a few of the main points in the story, and I always know the ending. And then at some point during the course of the writing, I will, when I'm about 60,000 words in, I will do a Roman numeral outline, very short sentences saying, okay, he goes here, something like the barest bones skeleton of the end of the book. It's, sort of like a map quest
Sure.
direction. If I had to sell a book by writing an outline of it, it would take the fun and the discovery, it would take that away, and then I would hate to be bound to an outline. There's always these times where when you're writing and you feel like you've tapped into some force bigger than yourself, and your characters start saying and doing things that you did not intend, and that's like the most magical feeling when you're writing. I mean, that's the reason why I write, and I wrote a second novel after the first, because it was like, holy crap. As I'm writing, things will occur to me that might change the course of the book, but I usually know, at least, it's sort of like fumbling through the dark with a flashlight. I know usually what's immediately in front of me. It's sort of the Ernest Hemingway thing, like, stop writing every night while you still know what's going to happen in the next scene. Don't ever write to the end of your buffer, it's sort of like the video download. Otherwise, you'll stall out. I don't really believe anyone can teach anyone else how to write a novel. It's something you learn through experience. So the best way that anyone could learn to write would be to read a bunch of books and then get their ass in the chair and write a manuscript. And you learn a lot, because everyone's process is going to be different. There's a lot of people I know who have to write extensive outlines, and that's how their brain works. That's what they like, and then they can rewrite the story again. For me, I could never do that, but I don't doubt the effectiveness of that way of doing it. It just doesn't work for me.
Do you think without writing an outline did you find when you wrote Southern Gods that there was quite a bit of rewriting because, maybe you were in Act 3 and you realized that you needed something to happen in Act 1 and 2, so you had to go back and change those things, or was it kind of organic and it just seemed to all flow the way it should?
I didn't feel like I have that problem. Honestly, I thought the book was long, but everyone tells me it was short. I did 7 after I finished the first draft, I did 7 passes, but only really 2 scenes that got really sort of reworked. But the rest of it is, other than polishing and tightening things up and making things, a little bit better, it's pretty much very close to the first draft in that sense. Part of being a writer for me is also another way of psychoanalyzing yourself, is like it's an exercise in humility. As a writer, anything you write, at least for me, is going to have some flaws in it. By nature, it's a one-person thing. It's very myopic, and you write alone, and other people's opinions really, really help to form and make something better. I'm a big believer in a team effort and collaboration. So you have to sort of go into the house of editing with very humble.
So tell me about your path to getting published. How did you find your agent?
This is a funny story. I had written a couple of novels. I had been shopping this book to agents, and I'd written a query letter. There's a blog called Query Shark, and I'd been, studying it and, submitting to agents, and been getting rejected. And a couple of folks asked for partial manuscripts, and I've still never heard back from them. And then I've had this, I had flat rejections, and I was working on it. One of the hardest things for starting out writers is there's this confidence issue, because you're not published, you don't think that your work could possibly be that good. Like, at some point, you sort of feel like, I'm just going to go get what I can. When I know I can get, like, I can get this small press publisher to publish my book, or I'm going to publish it Kindle or whatever, because you don't have the confidence that a published author has because they've had the affirmation of someone saying, we're going to publish your book and we're going to pay you money for it. And it's a really hard thing to deal with. Honestly, it's one of the main things I had trouble with when I was going to conventions and whatever. I'd see these authors, and usually like of books that maybe I didn't really think were that good, or sometimes they would put authors like, well, good, big name, not big name, but published authors whom I respected. But on the same panels, there'd be like self-published authors. It was really disheartening to me to see all that. So I submitted this book to a small press publisher who, after a year of sitting on it, like said, yeah, in sort of not a really enthusiastic, we'd love to publish this book, but like, we think we could publish this book. and so I was like, great, okay, you're going to publish the book. And I was a member of this writing forum, like on Writing Well, where people would post snippets of their work and get feedback and whatever. And it was totally unmoderated. There was no one there protecting the noobs, and there was this raging dick on there, this asshole that just terrorized the place. And I was like, this guy is just such a prick. And he would dole out this advice to people like from on high. It was probably good advice because it was all about the market, but it was just always couched in phrases that were so denigrating. He's just an asshole the way he stated it. But a lot of what he was saying was right. Those people who technically they're right, but they're just, the way they deliver it is so annoying that it's hard to take their advice. So I got in an argument with him on this board, and it turned into this huge flame war where it got really personal. And then afterwards, I've never been more angry in my life with some of the things the guy said to me. I mean, it was just like he found out who I was, and he went to my blog, and then he started making fun of me. I mean, it was just horrible. And then, so a couple months later, I get a Facebook friend request, and I was like, "You got to be kidding me!" Like that's what I responded to his friend request. And he's like, "Look, we're adults, come on." And from there, we had sort of a combative relationship. We still sort of do, but he's turned out to be my best friend. I mean, online. And, he's the one who introduced me to my agent. I mean, it was just...
So, but it sounds like you did have your share of the rejections and the I didn't fall in love with it, blah, blah, blah.
Yeah, and, the form rejection. And, I had actually submitted it to Donald Moss. My agent is Stacia Decker of the Donald Moss Literary Agency. And I had gotten a rejection from Donald Moss Literary from intern 2, who gave me a form rejection. So that was always funny that it's like, I managed to get in there anyway.
Right. Get over the wall kind of thing. So have you done any readings, or have you gone, speaking for this book?
I have done some readings. I've never really done a reading from this book. I usually try, when I do readings, I try to I like just reading like a full story. So I have a couple of flash pieces I like to just do that are a full story in themselves. But at some point I will have to do readings for Southern Gods. I don't actually like the sort of formalized, I am reading to you and you are listening. I do love talking to people and getting out there and like chatting with them about books and what they like and, what I like. And I like interacting with folks that have the same interests as me, which is books and literature. It's funny because I've performed since I was a teen in bands, and I never get really stage fright or anything like that. But when I have to read or get up in front of people in the literary sense, I get nervous. I mean, not so much that it incapacitates me, but it's not as enjoyable to me as like, strapping on a guitar. I guess, that is a shield.
So if you were going to give some advice to people who are just starting out, or to writers who are trying to get published, getting rejections, are being maybe tempted by ebooks, but really they don't necessarily want to go that path, and they're kind of struggling with maybe a fear that I need to just get it out there, and what would you tell that person?
Well, first off, I'd say, write the book you would like to read. I mean, don't write a book because of you think that you need to be writing toward the market, and don't write a book thinking that you need to be like a highfalutin literary personage, but you really enjoy mysteries or crime. I mean, write the book that you want to read. You have to please yourself first, and hope that your sensibilities are not too far off from what the markets are. But I mean, if you're going to live with months with a manuscript, it has to be something that sort of turns you on. And so that would be the first thing. I mean, it's hard. It's really hard, and it's really subjective. And at some point, you have to just trust that you do know how to do it right. Unless everyone's telling you suck, then you probably do suck. I mean, I didn't have that. When I was first writing, when I first started writing, not when I was in my early 20s, but when I was writing, when I started when I was 37, I joined all these like online writing workshops, and I went to these writing boot camps where they critique stories and whatever. And I realized after a while that all this feedback wasn't helping me. Like I workshop Southern Gods on this online writing workshops and at this place called Borderlands Boot Camp. And Borderlands Boot Camp was great for me making connections and meeting people, but I didn't take one bit of advice I got there in the end because it didn't really work for me. I just, even like what one of the editors and some of the bigger name authors, I was just like, I'm just not feeling that. I'm not agreeing with you, and they told me everything from you need to get rid of the prologue, you need to gut, this line, you need to come up with your own mythology and not use anyone else's. I mean, all these things they told me, and I was just like, finally, I just had to say, I had to have the balls just to say, you know what? No, I don't agree with you, and I'm gonna do it my way. That's sort of a hard thing to do when you're unpublished. It sort of speaks to the confidence thing I was talking about because, you're like, most writers, all they want to do is get it published, and they'll sell their soul and gut their work, just to get that first one in. And at some point, you have to say no. I mean, you have to just say, listen, this is what it is, and either it'll get published and everything's fine, or it won't. I mean, I actually thought that Southern Gods was going to be the trunk novel, and I had turned my attention to my later novels. I mean,
yeah, I appreciate you saying that because I think there is a lot of advice out there, and I think there's this kind of fine line with, when you're starting out, kind of being open to that advice from someone who may be more experienced, but at the same time doing a gut check and saying, okay, I hear you, but I don't agree with it, and I'm gonna set that aside. I've considered it, thought about it, but no.
Yeah. I mean, part of the big lure of things like Joseph Campbell's The Hero Myth, or like people who use the screenplay method of writing novels, it's like people like that because it's very reassuring because it gives them a structure that it's like, oh, okay, this is just novel writing, and I've got my structure because it has to hit these notes. And that's really, really comforting. But honestly, I find, for me, that those things are sort of, you don't write, I mean, I don't write like that. I personally think they're sort of bunk. Joseph Campbell was talking about mythology and the similarities between myths. He wasn't talking about, I mean, he mentioned that Star Wars had some similarities between the Arthurian legend, but he wasn't saying that that's the way to create books, or films. And these people have just taken that because it's easy for them. I mean, it's in some ways, industrializing, novel writing. And I feel like it should be individual for each story and each person. But that's just my opinion. So I'm not a big sort of 3-act structure. However, my books could easily be broken into 3 acts, but I think they could easily be broken into 5 acts. I think one of my friends, Dan O'Shea, he's a great, fantastic writer, says, you know what, humans see the patterns they're looking for. And if you're looking for a 3-act structure in a book, you'll find it. But if you're looking for, a 5-act, like a Shakespearean drama structure, you'll also find that. It's not the way to create it for Dan, sure. I mean, it might be good for literary criticism and try to break it open and try to understand it, but it's not for me as a writer. I mean, the only rule I think is a hard and fast is there are no rules.
Exactly.
And also you can't sell an unfinished manuscript. I mean,
right.
that's the biggest. Well, all right, some people can, but I mean, as a starting author, you cannot. And
right.
The best thing is to approach it with diligence and vigor. You have to complete. You have to finish. Always be closing. That's really the big deal. And then from there, it's a matter of revision and learning the industry and getting the right place for your book.
Thank you, John. This was Brian Mercer for Author Magazine. Today I've been speaking with John Horner Jacobs, author of Southern Gods.